Up next, we're going to take a look at comments and how they're used to insert notes into your code. They have no effect on the parsing of the script. That's how the script is compiled or executed. PHP has two C standard notations for comments, single line and multi-line. And there's also a Unix shell type command as well. We're going to take a look at that and a lot of the details around comments. So if you've never used comments before, this one's for you. Once again, guys, be sure to stick around for the entirety of the video as I give most of my insights towards the end of the lesson. All right, with that being said, let's jump in. Okay, let's talk about commenting your PHP code. So in the real world, you may be creating like hundreds of programs. So what comments should do is remind you what the code does and why. So let's start with introducing a comment. There are three types of comments inside of PHP. I'm going to introduce something that we're going to talk about in another video, but just follow along. I'm going to create what's called a variable, and I'm going to give it a value. And I'm going to close that with the semicolon. I'm going to introduce a comment, but we're going to go through all three of them, okay? The trick about comments is that you don't want to make it obvious. You don't want to like comment something that obviously just makes sense. So a comment like this might not be overly useful. It's just because you should probably use comments to describe things that are kind of tricky or hard to read. I mean, looking at this code right now, you can see that, well, I've assigned this name, Fortnite, this game, into this variable here. Now, if you're familiar with variables, this might make a lot of sense. So this line here is known as a single line comment. So the idea of comments is to give whoever's reading your code some context around what the actual code is doing. So let's try another example. If I wrote something like this, where I declare a variable, and I'm just going to call it A, I'm going to give it a value, and I'm going to give the value 2022. I'm going to declare another variable, I'm going to call this one B, and I'm going to give that a value of 1994. And I'm going to do this one more time. And I'm going to give this variable an expression. I'm going to say A minus B, and then I'm going to print out the value of C. Now, if you have some kind of programming background or use another language, or perhaps, use PHP before, this can kind of make sense. But if you take a closer look, this A variable represents a number, 2022, and this B variable represents another number, 1994. And it's doing some kind of calculation, and then we print out this other variable. But to someone else looking outside in, this may be hard to read, and this is where the concept of comments come around. Hey guys, what's up? Kevin here. I just want to give a big shout out to my subscribers. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. Be sure to give the videos a like, a thumbs up, and start a conversation. Much appreciated. Now let's get back to the video. Now, you did see this type comment that I used before in the previous example. Now, this is a single line comment and it'll be ignored by the PHP engine. So we could do something like this. We could say the year. We could also say what this number actually represents, the year PHP was created. And in this one, we could say C is the calculation or value from A minus B. And then down here, we could say something like we print the value of C. Now, this is what I've mentioned in the beginning. We've really just over-commented some of the obvious things, or things that you could intuitively kind of figure out by looking at it, even though this is still a little bit cryptic. Let's just clean this up a little bit. Now, if we look at this versus the one on the top, we can clearly see that if I came back a few months later, or a few years later, or at a different time, just looking at the variables and the way they're declared and the self-describing nature of the variables, I can look at this simple script and see that without even using comments, that it actually makes sense. The current year is defined as 2022, the date created is 1994. I do a calculation for the age of PHP using the current year minus the date created, and then I echo out a simple message. I can even add something here that makes a little bit more sense. So as of the year, and we'll just say the current year. Okay, that looks a little bit better. So if we go into the browser, we can clearly see that, the first one, 28, is just being printed out here with print C. And this message here on the second one, as of the year 2022, the PHP language is 28 years old. So when your variables and your comments are self-describing, we can minimize comments. You could then put something like this, a simple comment. The code's readability is a lot better than the example above. Okay, so you saw the first style comment, and that comes from a C style background. So if you program with C or C++, this may look familiar. The other way you could do that is to use a shell style comment. So we can replace this with the pound sign. So when PHP encounters the hashtag on this line, anything after the hashtag all the way to the very end is considered to be ignored by the compiler or is not parsed by PHP. So this type of comment is found around Unix shell scripting languages, and it's good for making short comments just like the ones above, and also for making notes. Sometimes, depending on the version of PHP or the version of the code that you're using, you may see comments something like this. This is really no different than up here. It's just, once again, if you remember that anything past the hashtag is ignored and the compiler does not compile it. So this is more of a stylized version of this. That leads into another style comment that we'll talk about in just a moment. But before we do that, so there is a caution around this comment style. In later versions of PHP, if you start with a £sign and you follow that comment with, another symbol such as a square bracket, you'll actually get a parse error. So if we go back to our script and we run this, you'll see this error that we're expecting a specific token. Do note that when you follow this pound symbol with a square bracket, you're setting yourself up for some of the attribute or reflection API usage. So just be aware that when you're doing any type of Unix shell type comments, you could easily replace these, something like this. It's exactly the same thing. The PHP interpreter will ignore this. There's actually a better way to do multiple line comments. So we could do something like this. So this is what we use for multiple line comments. The thing to note about this is, as in HTML, white space characters such as spaces, tabs, and comments, they're all ignored by the PHP engine. So this allows you a lot of freedom as far as how you format your code or even how you format your comments. For example, here's another comment that I've just added, and this is still using the multiple line comments. It's just formatted a little bit differently. If you're familiar with Laravel, this is sometimes how they style some of their comments. So at the end of the day, when I think about comments and writing less comments or just not over commenting, a well-chosen variable name makes the code easier to read and reduces the amount of comments that you'll have to use. So the three comment types are the shell type comment, there is the C type comments, so something like this that's inline, and if you needed it, you could do the multi-line comment, which starts with a /, an asterisk, and another asterisk, and then a closing slash. As I said before, comments can also be used to comment out code. Let's say I had a block of code below, just like this one, and I added the asterisk. You'll see that it'll literally comment out everything after this asterisk, after this delimiter. And you could, go to here and then add the asterisk and then close that. And then this becomes valid code. However, since this is dependent on these variables, it doesn't make sense and you get an error. This might be applicable if you're doing something around testing or you just want to take a chunk of code out just to see how something works. I don't recommend leaving uncommented codes or things like this inside of your actual code files. Using multiple line comments like this will be good for, say you wanted to refactor something or kind of change the way something works for the developer, but the actual output is exactly the same to the end user. You may want to comment out a block of code at a time to see how something works and then write cleaner, more concise and readable code. That is quite useful for, a way to use these comments.